The lobby of the hotel was alive with sound and motion that evening. Guests moved in and out, laughter mixed with the soft hum of conversation, and waiters passed between tables carrying trays of sparkling drinks. The marble floor reflected the warm glow of chandeliers, and at the far end of the room stood a glossy black grand piano. It was meant to be played by the evening's hired performer, a young local musician known for his light tunes that blended easily into the background. But that night, the performer hadn't shown up. The piano sat there, beautiful but silent, as if waiting for someone to touch it. The hotel manager looked worried. Guests had started to notice the absence of music, and the lively atmosphere was beginning to fade into awkward quiet. Near one of the tables sat a woman in her early 40s. She wasn't dressed to attract attention, just a simple gray coat, comfortable shoes, and a scarf that had clearly been worn many times before. Her hair was tied back loosely and she carried a small satchel, old but neatly kept. She looked around quietly, not rushing, not nervous, just observing. When the manager walked past her table, she raised her hand slightly, as if unsure whether to speak. He stopped and offered a polite smile. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I noticed your pianist isn't here. If you like, I could play for a little while, just until he arrives." The manager blinked, surprised. "You?" he asked gently, not to sound rude but genuinely caught off guard. "You're a musician?" She nodded. "Yes, I've played for many years. Only if you're all right with it." He hesitated. It wasn't that he doubted her kindness, she seemed calm and sincere. But there was something unusual about the request. Most people wouldn't offer to step in like that, especially in a hotel filled with strangers. And besides, what if she wasn't very good? He couldn't risk guests complaining. "Oh, that's kind of you," he said carefully. "But it's all right. I'm sure he'll be here soon." She smiled politely and nodded, not pressing further. Yet after a few more minutes of silence, the manager began to feel uneasy again. The chatter had dropped to a low murmur. Several guests were glancing toward the piano as if wondering why the music hadn't started. Then the woman spoke again, this time gently but with a quiet confidence. "If you'd like, I can just play something soft. If it doesn't fit the mood, I'll stop right away. No problem." Her tone carried no ego, only kindness and a genuine desire to help. The manager looked around, then sighed. "All right," he said finally. "Just something gentle, yes?" She nodded once. The staff cleared a small space around the piano. A few guests turned their heads to watch. They didn't know who she was or why she was sitting down to play. To most of them, she looked like a traveler, someone waiting for a train, not someone about to perform in a fancy hotel. As she sat on the piano bench, her hands rested lightly on her lap. For a moment, she didn't move. Her eyes drifted across the keys, those smooth, polished ivories gleaming under the soft lights. Then she placed her fingers on them, testing their feel like someone greeting an old friend after a long time apart. A few people chuckled quietly from their tables. Someone whispered, "Who's she?" Some guest trying to show off? But the woman didn't seem to hear. Her breathing steadied. She closed her eyes for just a moment as if listening for something inside herself. Then she pressed the first note. It was quiet, barely enough to be heard over the clinking of glasses. But the tone was pure. There was something honest about it, something that immediately made people turn their heads. She followed with another, and soon a gentle melody began to take shape. It wasn't loud or showy or fast. It was soft and calm, like a memory being told through sound. The music had space to breathe. It was the kind of tune that seemed to fill the air with warmth without demanding attention, yet no one could ignore it. Conversations began to fade. A waiter stopped mid-step, his tray still in hand. The manager, standing near the reception desk, leaned forward slightly, his earlier doubt turning into quiet curiosity. The woman's hands moved gracefully, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Every note seemed to know exactly where it wanted to go. As she played, her expression changed. It was no longer the careful politeness of a stranger trying to help. It became something deeper, almost like she had stepped into another world. There was peace in her face, but also a shadow of sadness, as though the music came from a place long hidden in her heart. A man sitting near the bar whispered to his wife, "She's good, really good." The wife nodded, not taking her eyes off the piano. "It's beautiful," she said softly. A little boy near the corner leaned on the table wide-eyed. His mother reached over and told him to eat his food, but even she was staring. The melody continued to grow, still gentle but now fuller, carrying emotion that words couldn't describe. Some people began to record with their phones, though they tried to stay quiet, afraid to break the spell. The manager crossed his arms, smiling a little. He hadn't expected this. At first he'd been worried about what guests would think, but now the whole lobby felt transformed. The tension had melted away, replaced by calm admiration. The woman played as if she had done this 1,000 times before, though there was something different about her touch. It wasn't the precision of someone performing for fame or applause. It was personal, heartfelt, raw. She finished her first piece with a soft final chord that seemed to linger in the air even after her hands lifted. The silence that followed was so deep it felt almost sacred. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then gentle applause began at one table, then another, until the entire room filled with clapping. The sound wasn't thunderous, it was respectful, surprised, genuine. The woman smiled quietly, looking down at her hands almost shyly. "Would you like another?" she asked the manager. He nodded immediately. "Please," he said with a laugh of disbelief. "Please, keep playing." And so she did. She played something a little different this time, slower, more emotional, like a lullaby that carried the weight of memory. Guests leaned back in their chairs, no longer talking, no longer checking their phones. Even the children sat still. It was as if time itself had slowed down. The air felt softer. The light seemed warmer. The woman didn't look around. She didn't need to. She wasn't playing for the people, she was playing through them, as if the music spoke to something they all carried but had forgotten how to express. After a while, the staff began to notice something else. The woman didn't have any sheet music. Every note came from memory, or perhaps from somewhere deeper. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, and her eyes occasionally lifted toward the ceiling, as if she was remembering something far away. The manager, who had been skeptical at first, felt a lump rise in his throat. There was something about her playing that felt too sincere to ignore. This wasn't just skill, it was soul. He found himself wondering who she really was. Maybe a teacher? Maybe someone who used to perform? But why was she dressed so simply? And why had she offered to play like it was nothing? When the song ended, the applause came quicker this time, louder, more confident. A few guests even stood. The woman nodded in gratitude, then rose from the piano bench as if preparing to leave. "Wait," the manager said quickly, walking toward her. "That was wonderful, truly. You can't just stop now." She smiled softly. "I'm glad you liked it. I didn't want to intrude. I just thought the room felt too quiet." "Are you kidding?" one guest called from across the room. "You made our night." The woman laughed lightly, shaking her head. "That's kind of you," she said. "Thank you." As she gathered her things, people began to approach, some asking where she had learned to play, others simply thanking her for the music. But she answered gently, without giving much away. "I've played since I was a child," she said. "Music has always been a friend to me." And with that, she walked toward the lobby doors, her steps calm, her shoulders relaxed. The sound of her last song still hung in the air, echoing faintly even as she disappeared outside into the cool night. For a long moment, no one spoke. The guests looked at each other, smiling, still moved by what they had just heard. The manager stood near the piano, staring at the keys. He realized he hadn't even asked her name. The next evening, the same hotel lobby looked almost exactly as it had before. Polished floor, quiet chatter, warm lights glowing from above. But there was a small difference this time. People who had been there the previous night were still talking about what had happened. At first, it had seemed like a small, lucky moment, a guest filling in for a missing pianist. But the music that woman had played had stayed in their minds like a dream they couldn't forget. Some said it was the most beautiful thing they'd ever heard in that place. Others said it felt like her music had told a story they couldn't quite explain. The manager had been thinking about it all day. He couldn't stop replaying the sound of those melodies in his head. There was something about her, something familiar and mysterious at the same time. He felt as though she had left behind a quiet mark that refused to fade. When evening came, he kept glancing toward the door, hoping she might return. It was strange to admit, but he wanted to hear her again. He even told the front desk clerk, "If you see that woman with the gray coat, let me know right away." But she didn't come. The regular pianist had returned. cheerful and apologetic for missing his slot the night before. He sat at the piano and began to play as usual, bright tunes, pleasant and polished, but somehow the magic wasn't there. Guests clapped politely, yet the energy felt ordinary. The music was fine, but after what they'd experienced, fine wasn't enough anymore. A few guests whispered to each other between songs. "Remember the lady from last night?" one said. "The one who played without music sheets?" "I do," another replied. "I've been thinking about that too." Who was she? Even the waiters had noticed the difference. The sound from the regular pianist blended into the background again. Just noise that filled the space but didn't touch anyone. Later that night, as the last guests were leaving, the manager stood by the piano staring at it thoughtfully. He brushed his fingers lightly across the keys. The instrument looked the same, but it felt different somehow, like it had been awakened and was now waiting for her to return. 2 days passed, then 3, and still no sign of her. The memory of her music had become almost a legend inside the hotel. Staff told new guests about the woman who played like a dream, though nobody even knew her name. Some called her the silent pianist, others the mystery woman. Then, one late afternoon, as the light outside began to fade, the lobby doors opened and there she was. She stepped inside quietly, just as before, carrying the same worn satchel, wearing the same calm expression. A few people who recognized her turned in surprise. The manager, who had been speaking with a guest, stopped mid-sentence. He walked over, smiling with real warmth this time. "You're back," he said. "I didn't think I'd see you again." She gave a small smile. "I wasn't planning to stay away for long," she said softly. "I had some time today and thought I'd stop by." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to play again?" People are still talking about that night. Her eyes softened with a mix of shyness and gratitude. "If you don't mind," she said. "I don't want to disturb your guests." "Disturb?" The manager said with a short laugh. "You made half this place believe in magic. Please, go ahead." The grand piano stood ready, its lid open, the light reflecting off its polished surface. As she walked toward it, the atmosphere in the room began to shift again. Conversations quieted and curious faces turned toward her. A couple sitting by the window nudged each other. "That's her," the woman whispered. "The one I told you about." Even the pianist from the previous nights, who had been playing softly, stood aside, smiling in respect. "Please," he said, "the piano's yours." The woman thanked him with a nod, then sat down. She placed her bag carefully beside the bench, straightened her posture, and took a slow breath. Her hands hovered above the keys, still for a moment, as though listening to the silence before deciding what to say. Then the music began. This time it was different from before. The melody was slower, deeper, and more emotional. It carried the sound of longing and memory, like the echo of something once lost but never forgotten. The first notes floated through the air so gently that people instinctively stopped moving. Every note she played seemed to speak to the heart. It wasn't just the technical beauty of her playing, it was the emotion behind it. Her hands moved like they were tracing something invisible in the air, shaping feelings into sound. A young couple who had been arguing earlier found themselves holding hands without realizing it. A man reading a newspaper set it down and listened, his eyes slowly softening. The waiters stopped serving for a moment, just watching her in silence. The music built gradually, growing stronger and fuller, then falling back again into delicate, quiet moments. It felt like she was telling a story with joy, pain, hope, and forgiveness, all at once. Somewhere near the back, an older gentleman wiped his eyes, embarrassed by his own tears. That's real music," he whispered. The manager stood again near the front desk, unable to look away. The melody reached inside him, stirring something he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know what her story was, but he could feel that every note she played came from somewhere very real. When she reached the final passage, the room seemed to hold its breath. The ending wasn't dramatic, it was tender, soft, like a goodbye whispered through music. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was almost as beautiful as the song itself. Then the applause came, slow at first, then stronger, until it filled the lobby. Some people stood, others simply smiled with that dazed, peaceful look people get after witnessing something rare. The woman smiled faintly, nodded in gratitude, and bowed her head. "Who are you?" someone asked softly from the front row of chairs. Where did you learn to play like that? She hesitated, her eyes lowering for a moment. I used to play a long time ago, she said quietly. But I stopped for a while. Why? The guest asked gently. She smiled sadly. Sometimes life asks for silence, she said. And sometimes it gives the music back. The manager felt a shiver run through him. He wanted to ask more, to know who she really was, but something in her expression told him not to. It wasn't time for questions. It was time for listening. After her second song, people started coming up to her again, thanking her, asking if she would come back tomorrow. She nodded politely to each of them but didn't promise anything. When the crowd began to thin, the manager approached her again. You know, he said gently, you could perform here officially. I'd be honored to have you as our pianist. She looked touched but shook her head. That's kind of you, she said softly. But I'm not ready for that. I only play when it feels right. He nodded in understanding. At least tell me your name, he said. She smiled almost playfully. Maybe next time, she replied. Before leaving, she turned back toward the piano, resting her fingers lightly on the lid. For a brief second, she seemed lost in thought. Then she whispered something to herself, too quiet for anyone else to hear. When she walked out, the sound of her music still seemed to linger in the room, echoing faintly in people's minds like a distant melody carried by memory. That night, as the staff cleaned up and prepared to close, one of the waiters said quietly, "She's not just a pianist, is she?" The manager smiled softly. "No," he said. "She's something more. I just don't know what yet." Outside, under the glow of streetlights, the woman walked slowly through the quiet streets, her breath forming small clouds in the cool air. She didn't look back at the hotel. Her expression was calm, thoughtful, almost peaceful, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. As she turned a corner, she passed a small shop window where an old piano sat behind the glass. She paused for a moment looking at it. Her reflection stared back, older, wiser, carrying stories no one else could see. She reached out, pressing her fingers gently against the glass, then smiled faintly to herself. "Not yet," she whispered. "But soon." Then she walked away into the night, leaving behind only the soft echo of footsteps and the memory of a song that no one who heard it would ever forget. Days turned into a week, and still the woman didn't return. The hotel had gone back to its usual rhythm, music playing, people talking, glasses clinking, but something felt different. Even when the regular pianist performed, people often compared him quietly to her. "It's good," they would say, "but not the same." There was a kind of stillness left behind, a sense that something beautiful had come and gone, and no one quite knew how to describe it. The manager tried to go about his work as usual, but he found himself distracted. Every time the lobby doors opened, he glanced up, half expecting to see her walk in again. She had said maybe next time, but there had been no next time. He had even asked around and at nearby cafes, music stores, and small theaters, but no one seemed to know her. It was as though she had appeared out of nowhere, played her music, and disappeared again into the world. Then, one rainy afternoon, something unexpected happened. The hotel was quieter than usual. The rain outside had slowed the traffic, and only a few guests were sitting in the lobby sipping tea and reading. The manager was reviewing paperwork at the front desk when he heard a familiar sound, a single note from the piano. He looked up quickly. There she was. She stood by the piano, a little wet from the rain, brushing water from her coat sleeve. Her expression was calm, but her eyes looked tired, as if she had been walking for a long time. The manager smiled in surprise. "You're back," he said warmly. "I was starting to think we'd imagined you." She smiled faintly. "I wasn't far," she said. "I just needed time." Without waiting for more words, she sat down at the piano. The sound of the bench creaked softly under her weight, and once again, the lobby began to quiet down. Guests looked up, some whispering, some smiling in recognition. Then, as her hands touched the keys, the music began again. This time, it wasn't the gentle melody of before. It started low, deep, thoughtful, almost heavy, as if the piano itself was speaking through her. The notes rose and fell, carrying a story without words, a story that everyone in that room could somehow feel. It was a piece full of emotion, sorrow and strength woven together. It didn't feel rehearsed. It felt lived, like someone remembering something painful but finding peace in it. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the windows, joining the rhythm of her song. The guests forgot about their tea, their phones, their conversations. They simply listened. The manager leaned against the counter, his eyes fixed on her. He noticed how her shoulders moved with the rhythm, how her eyes sometimes closed when she reached a certain chord, how her fingers trembled slightly after each intense passage. It wasn't performance. It was honesty. When the piece ended, the silence was almost unreal. No one clapped right away. They were still caught in the spell. Then, as if waking from a dream, people began to applaud softly, respectfully. The woman smiled gently, looking down at her hands. "Thank you," she said quietly. The manager approached her after the applause faded. "That was incredible," he said. "Every time you play, it feels like we hear something new, something deeper." She looked at him thoughtfully, her eyes soft. "Music changes when people listen with their hearts," she said. "It finds its own way." He nodded, not fully understanding her words, but feeling their truth. "You really should let people know who you are," he said. "You have a gift that deserves to be shared." Her smile faded just slightly. "I used to share it," she said after a pause. "A long time ago, on stages with lights and big crowds, but I lost myself in it." She took a breath, her gaze drifting toward the window. "After a while, the music stopped sounding like mine. I was playing notes, not feelings. So I left it behind." The manager listened quietly. He didn't want to interrupt. She continued, her voice soft but steady. "Then life happened. People changed. I changed. And the silence lasted longer than I expected. Until one day I sat down again, and the music returned." Her words hung in the air for a moment. "I'm sorry," the manager said gently. "That must have been hard." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "It was. But pain teaches you where the truth lives. You start to play not to impress anyone and just to breathe again." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain outside filled the silence between them. Finally, the manager asked, "Would you come back tomorrow? Maybe we can set a time for you to play. Most people would love it." She hesitated. "I don't plan things like that anymore," she said. "If I feel it, I come. If I don't, I wait." He nodded in understanding. Somehow that made perfect sense for her. That evening, she played one more song before leaving. It was gentle and full of warmth, like a quiet thank you to everyone who had listened. When she finished, she stood, nodded to the room, and left without another word. But something changed after that night. She began to appear more often, not every day, but enough that people started timing their visits, hoping to catch her playing. Some guests would ask the front desk, "Has she been here today?" Others lingered in the lobby longer than usual, just in case. When she played, the hotel transformed. It didn't matter who you were or what brought you there. For those moments, everyone shared the same feeling. There were no arguments, no distractions, no noise, just music and peace. Children sat quietly, mesmerized. Businessmen stopped checking their phones. Couples held hands. Even the staff slowed their steps when passing by the piano. One evening, a man who had been staying at the hotel for a week approached her after she played. He said, "I lost my wife last year. Tonight, your music. It made me feel like she was here again." "Thank you." The woman's eyes filled with quiet emotion. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said softly, "Then she was." Word about her began to spread slowly, not through advertisements or posters, but through whispers. People started coming just to see if they might hear her. Some called her the woman of the piano. Others simply said, "She's the one who makes the room quiet." Yet, for all the attention, she never sought fame. She never mentioned her past, never shared her full story. She would arrive, play, and leave quietly, always with that same calm, distant grace. But one night, something unexpected happened. As she finished a piece, one of the guests approached her with an old photograph. It was a picture from a music magazine years ago, showing a young woman performing on stage with a grand orchestra. The guest asked gently, "Is this you?" For a moment, she froze. Her eyes lingered on the photo, her face unreadable. Then she gave a soft smile and said, "I used to know her." The guest looked confused, but she only thanked him kindly and walked away. The manager, watching from nearby, understood then that there was much more to her story, a story she wasn't ready to tell. But he also knew something else. Whatever had brought her here, she wasn't just passing through anymore. She was healing piece by piece through her music. That night, long after the guests had left, the manager stayed behind to close up. As he locked the doors, he heard something faint, a melody coming from the piano again. He turned around. She was still there. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful. She was playing softly to an empty room, as if the piano was the only one she trusted with her secrets. The manager didn't move or speak. He just listened. The music was simple but full of heart, every note carrying something raw and real. When she finished, she looked up and saw him watching. She smiled gently and said, "Sometimes the piano listens better than people do." He nodded. "I think you're right." She gathered her things, thanked him quietly, and walked out into the cool night once more. As the doors closed behind her, the echo of her final notes lingered in the lobby, soft, haunting, and beautiful. And in that moment he realized something. The mystery wasn't just who she was. The real wonder was how her music could make complete strangers feel seen, heard, and understood, without a single word. It was late one evening when the hotel was quieter than usual. Most of the guests had gone to dinner and only a few people lingered in the lobby. The woman sat at the piano again, her fingers gently resting on the keys but not playing yet. She looked thoughtful, almost hesitant, as if she wasn't sure whether to begin. The manager, who had been working behind the front desk, noticed her expression. He had grown used to seeing her calm, collected face, but tonight something was different. There was a softness in her eyes, a hint of something she had been carrying for a long time. He didn't want to interrupt her, but after a few minutes of silence, he walked over quietly and said, "Is everything all right?" She looked up and smiled faintly. "Yes," she said. "It's just one of those nights when the past feels close." He nodded. "The past has a way of finding us, doesn't it?" She gave a quiet laugh. "Yes, especially when you play music. Every note brings back something." He didn't say anything after that. He just waited, sensing that she wanted to speak. After a pause, she said softly, "You've been kind to me. Maybe it's time I tell you why I stopped playing for all those years." He sat down nearby, keeping his distance, not wanting to make her feel pressured. The room was still except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint sound of rain outside. She took a breath and began. "A long time ago," she said, "I lived for music. I practiced from morning until night. It was everything to me. I wanted to make people feel what I felt when I played, to move them, to touch something inside them that words couldn't reach." Her eyes drifted toward the piano as she spoke, as though she could see her younger self sitting there. "I worked hard, harder than I probably should have. I gave up everything else, friends, family time, even rest. I thought if I just kept going, I would reach the top. And for a while, I did." The manager listened quietly, his expression soft. "I started performing in concert halls," she continued. "Big places full of lights and noise. The applause was loud, but after every show I felt emptier. I didn't understand it then, but I was losing the very thing that had made me love music, the feeling." She paused for a moment, her hands clasped gently on her lap. And then something happened that changed everything. The manager didn't ask what. It felt better to let her speak in her own time. She looked down at her hands, the faint light catching the lines on her skin. There was a night, a concert. I was supposed to perform a piece I had written myself. It was special to me, something that came from my heart. But before I went on stage, the director told me to change it. He said it was too slow, too emotional, not what the audience wanted. He wanted something flashier, something that would make people cheer. Her voice grew softer. I agreed, even though it broke me inside. I played what he asked, not what I felt. The crowd clapped, but when I walked off stage, I knew I had betrayed myself. That night, I couldn't even touch the piano again. She looked away for a moment, blinking back tears she didn't want to show. Days turned into weeks, then months. I told myself I needed a break, but deep down I knew I had quit. I thought maybe music had left me, or maybe I had left it. The manager sat quietly, his heart heavy with her words. "That must have been hard," he said softly. She nodded. "Harder than I can explain. Music was the only language I truly knew, and suddenly I couldn't speak it anymore. I sold my piano, moved away from the city, and tried to start over. But no matter what I did, there was an emptiness I couldn't fill. Her voice trembled just slightly when she added, "I used to dream of music at night. I'd wake up and still hear the notes in my head." It was like the piano was calling me, but I couldn't answer. For a while, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain grew louder outside, steady and rhythmic, almost like a quiet song. She continued, her voice softer now. Years passed. I worked simple jobs. I lived quietly. Most people didn't know who I was or what I had done before, and I liked it that way. I thought I had buried that part of me for good. Her eyes lifted to the piano again. Then one day I walked past a music store. There was a young boy inside sitting at a piano trying to learn his first song. His fingers stumbled over every note, but he kept smiling. He was so happy just to play. I stood outside that window for a long time watching him. And I realized I missed that feeling. Her tone softened, filled with quiet emotion. That's when I started playing again. Not on stage, not for an audience, just for myself. I borrowed an old keyboard from a friend, and every night I'd play for a few minutes before bed. Sometimes I cried. Sometimes I smiled. But little by little, the music came back. The manager's eyes glistened slightly as he listened. There was something so real, so human in her story. It was like hearing the sound of healing in words. "So when you played here for the first time," he began gently. She nodded. "Yes, that was the first time I played in public again. I didn't plan it. I was just sitting there listening to the silence. The piano looked lonely, and I thought maybe it needed someone to play it. I didn't realize I needed it too." Her voice trembled a little at the end, and she smiled shyly as if embarrassed by her own honesty. The manager smiled too. "You changed the whole atmosphere that night. Everyone felt it. I think you reminded people what real music sounds like, what it feels like." She looked at him gratefully. "I think the piano reminded me too. Maybe that's why I keep coming back. It's not just about playing anymore. It's about feeling alive again." They sat there quietly for a few moments, listening to the rain. After a while, she said softly, "You know, I used to think losing music was the worst thing that could happen to me. But now I understand it was just part of the journey. Sometimes we need silence to learn what the sound really means." The manager nodded slowly. "Maybe you were never meant to stop playing, just to rest for a while." She smiled at that. "Maybe." Then, without another word, she turned back to the piano. Her fingers began to move again, this time softly, carefully, as if she were playing to the rain outside. The melody was tender, peaceful, a song of forgiveness and rediscovery. The manager closed his eyes and listened. He could feel the emotion in every note. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was acceptance. It was hope. When she finished, the room was silent again, but this time the silence felt warm, not heavy. "That one," the manager said quietly. "What do you call it?" She thought for a moment, then said, "I don't know yet. Maybe I'll call it The Return." He smiled. "It's perfect," she laughed softly. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just the beginning of something new." That night, when she left, the rain had stopped. The air outside was cool and clear, and the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement like stars on the ground. She walked slowly, her hands in her coat pockets, her face calm. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running from her past. She felt like she had made peace with it. As she turned the corner, a soft breeze carried the scent of rain and the faint echo of her last melody. Somewhere behind her, inside that hotel lobby, her music still lingered, touching hearts she would never meet, speaking truth she could never say in words, and for her, that was enough. Weeks had passed since that quiet night when the woman shared her story. The hotel had returned to its usual rhythm. Travelers checking in and out, soft chatter in the lobby, and the steady hum of daily life. Yet something had changed. The piano, once a silent piece of furniture, now felt alive. Every evening, without fail, she would sit at it and let her fingers dance across the keys. Her music had become part of the place itself. Guests would stop mid-conversation when they heard her play. The staff often found excuses to linger near the lobby just to listen. Even the people who didn't understand music could feel something deep inside them shift when she played. She never performed the same piece twice. Some nights her playing was full of quiet sadness, like a story whispered through time. Other nights it was bright and joyful, filled with energy and hope. No matter the tone, her music carried truth. It spoke without needing words. The manager often watched from a distance, proud, yet careful not to disturb her. He noticed how people reacted to her music, how their faces softened, how they paused to feel something they hadn't realized they were missing. One afternoon, a guest approached the front desk, a man in his 50s carrying a leather bag. He looked curious. "Who's the pianist that plays here every evening?" he asked. The manager smiled. "She's not a performer, just someone who loves to play." The man nodded thoughtfully. "I'm a music producer," he said. "I travel a lot, but I've never heard anything like what she plays." "It's honest." "You can't teach that." The manager didn't say much, but he passed along the man's kind words to her later that night. She listened quietly, then shook her head. "That's kind of him, but I'm not looking for anything like that anymore," she said. He understood. For her, the music wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about healing, about finding peace again. But the world has a strange way of circling back to those who live with honesty. One evening, the lobby was more crowded than usual. A small gathering of travelers had formed near the piano, some standing, others sitting quietly. The woman took her place at the keys as always, unaware that someone had started recording her performance on their phone. She began playing a piece she had been working on for weeks. It started with a slow, soft rhythm, gentle notes that drifted like falling snow. Then it built layer by layer until it became something powerful and full of life. Every note carried emotion. Loss, love, pain, forgiveness, all woven together. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then, as if on cue, applause filled the air. She looked up, surprised but smiling, a faint blush on her face. The next morning, the hotel was buzzing. The video had made its way online overnight. Within hours, it was being shared across social media. People from around the world were commenting, trying to find out who the mysterious pianist was. Some said her playing made them cry. Others said it reminded them of someone they loved and lost. A few even said it inspired them to start playing again after years of silence. When the manager told her what had happened, she was stunned. "People really listened?" she asked softly, almost disbelieving. He nodded. "More than listened. They felt it." She didn't know what to say. For years she had played in silence, never expecting anyone to care. And now somehow the world was hearing her again. Not because of fame or attention, but because of truth. Days went by and the attention grew. Journalists reached out. Musicians wanted to collaborate. Invitations started arriving for interviews and performances. But she hesitated. "I don't want to lose what I found here," she told the manager one evening. "If I go back to all that, I'm afraid I'll forget why I play." He looked at her with understanding. "Maybe you don't have to go back," he said gently. "Maybe this time you choose your own path." She thought about that. The idea lingered in her mind for days. Then, one afternoon, she received a letter. It was from a local music school for children. The letter said they had seen her video and wanted to invite her to visit, to play for the students and talk about her journey. She read the letter several times, unsure how to respond. The idea of performing for an audience again made her nervous, but something about it felt right. A week later, she stood in a small classroom filled with children. The piano was old and slightly out of tune, but the room was full of excitement. The children's faces lit up when she entered. "Will you play something for us?" one of them asked eagerly. She smiled. "Only if you promise to listen with your hearts, not just your ears." They all nodded, serious and sweet. She sat down and began to play. It wasn't a perfect performance. Her hands trembled slightly and a few notes came out uneven. But the music was alive. The children sat quietly, wide-eyed, completely drawn in. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then the room burst into applause. One little girl stood up and said softly, "I want to play like you someday." Her eyes filled with tears. She hadn't expected that kind of response, especially from children who barely knew her. In that moment, she realized something she hadn't before. It wasn't about being recognized. It wasn't about applause or fame. It was about connection, about passing something real to someone else. From that day on, she started teaching part-time at the school. She would still play at the hotel in the evenings, but during the day, she taught children how to listen, how to feel, how to let the piano speak for them. The lessons weren't just about technique. She told them stories about mistakes, about fear, about finding courage to begin again. The children adored her, and slowly word spread. People began calling her the Heart Pianist, a name that made her smile every time she heard it. Months passed. One evening, the hotel hosted a small charity event to raise funds for music education. They asked her to close the night with a performance. When she walked to the piano, the lights dimmed and the room fell silent. The audience was filled with people, hotel guests, locals, even some of her students sitting in the front row. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play.